Making decisions as a team can be very difficult because you're dealing with people. Maybe you have a very loud or dominating person in your team. Maybe you have too many quiet introvert people in your team. Maybe you have a manager or an architect that makes all the decisions for everybody. All of these situations are unhealthy for different reasons and can lead to bad decision making, frustrated people, or people who stop caring altogether. In this video, I'll lay out 5 different models of collective decision making, so you can see where on the scale of autonomy you are with your team. I'll also highlight 11 things that are helpful no matter what model you use. Let's dive into group decision making. The first model is Autocratic, and this is not really a team decision method. This can be used in a group, but effectively it's an individual making a decision for the group, who then communicates to the group that this is the decision that was made. This is often used when there's a leader who comes from inside or outside the group, that doesn't matter, but makes a decision for the team. This is of course not a team decision, even if you have to live with the consequences. You might think, I'm not in this situation, but if you have a lead dev or an architect in the team who listens to everybody's opinions and then makes a decision, you're still using this model. When feedback is gathered first, this model is sometimes called consultative, but it's still an autocratic way of making a decision, no matter how you call it. This might sound like a bad model, but in and on itself, it's not bad. It's only bad if you want the team to feel responsible for the consequences of the decision. The next model is a democratic model. Everybody gets an equal vote. Majority wins. But you need to define what majority means. Is it 50%? Is it 75%? Or is it the choice that had the most number of votes? A potential advantage of this is that it can be really fast to make a decision. Whenever you're all ready to vote, just vote. The end result is the decision. But if you do zero thinking or no desk research at all, then it becomes a group guess, and it's not an informed decision. The disadvantage of this model is that unpopular opinions can be very easily ignored. The most insightful, correct, or important point of view that one of your colleagues may have may get little or no votes. The next model is consent, which is asking the question, is it safe to try? As a team, you're all having to give consent to the question, are we okay to start moving in that direction? As a team, you're basically trying to not make a perfect decision, because many of those perfect decisions end up in endless discussions because you don't have all the information available, and some decisions just are optimization problems. You cannot satisfy all the requirements, so you have to make many sacrifices on multiple fronts. Instead, in the consent model, you're moving to a is it good enough way of thinking. You're trying to make the decision into a smaller version of itself. You can make a good decision with only 40 to 70% of the possible available information. So the question becomes, are we all okay to start moving in this direction because this looks like the best general direction? If we're halfway and it turns out to be the wrong direction, that's okay, we'll turn back. I like this model very much because it emphasizes exploration and learning. And it aligns very well with how software development is exploration and it is not production line. If you can find a way to try out a smaller version of the original idea, that's usually a great move. The next model is expert first consent. You're still asking the question, is it safe to try? But now, if you have an expert on this specific topic, you may not have one, but if you do, then you listen to the expert first. When you're dealing with a cross-functional team, so front-end, back-end, designers, everything in one team, I highly recommend this method because it puts everybody in their strength. Say you're making a design decision and you have a designer in your team. The opinion of the designer carries more weight than the rest because the designer for this specific decision, for this topic, is the expert. It's like having the democratic model but giving the designer 2 or 3 votes for this specific decision. The team could still outvote the designer if they would want to. This model can also be explained as sometimes you're deferring to somebody's expertise. The advantage is that you get the best of both worlds. You still have everybody's vote, but the expert's vote weighs a bit heavier. A disadvantage is that you could make the mistake of over-relying on the expert or on their perceived seniority. If you have a bunch of juniors and one senior in a team, then if the senior becomes the expert at everything, then you're slowly moving to an autocratic model and you're not efficiently using all the brains in your team. The fifth model is consensus. Everybody must agree, otherwise it's not a decision. When you're not in a rush and you really want to make the decision, this model can be very helpful. The strength of this model is that everybody's concerns must be handled. Everybody must slowly be convinced this is the right direction, this is the right way. And if that takes a lot of time, then so be it. We want to handle the concerns, and once we have taken them away, then you're okay to move on. Okay, then it is a good decision. If we don't handle your concern, the assumption in this model is we're not making a good decision. The weakness is that it can be a very slow process or even a stalemate. It can become a compromise if people get bored, they stop caring because it takes too long. So those were the 5 models I wanted to share. Let's look at them through the lens of team autonomy. Some of these models hinder team autonomy. They make it harder to have an empowered team. Think of an outside leader coming into a team making an autocratic decision. And some of these models suit an empowered team really well. Think of consent. So let's look at the models on the scale of autonomy, high to low. Autocratic is all the way at low autonomy because one person has all the power, especially if that person is outside of the group. Consensus is still low on autonomy because it's very easy for one person to steer in a very specific direction. Expert first consent is a lot better because everybody's voice contributes, but still some voices may weigh quite heavy. Consent is a lot higher on autonomy because everybody's voice contributes. And democratic is all the way at the bottom because everybody's vote counts completely equal. Now remember that this is a scale of team autonomy. It is not a scale of good or bad decisions. It takes a lot more different factors and team dynamics to get to a good decision. Next, I'd like to highlight 11 helpful things. 11 best practices that are helpful no matter what model you use. They could actually yield a better decision. Best practice number 1. The group actually agrees on a problem statement. Otherwise you get scope creep. People start solving other problems, maybe some of their own they can think of, with this decision as well. When defining the problem, I recommend opening up a whiteboard and trying to agree on a problem statement, listing down all the options you can choose from, as well as maybe any assumptions that you may have as a team. Be careful that you don't make your decision too binary. Often you're dealing with trade-offs in reality. It's not this is better than that. No, if we choose this thing, then this is the gain and this is the sacrifice we have to make. It can be difficult to agree on a problem because many problems we see are symptoms. They're not root causes. It's a best practice to try and get to the root cause as much as possible. And a technique that could be useful is asking why 5 times. To get to the root cause. It's called the 5 whys. The second helpful thing is that the group understands the product vision. If the group doesn't know where the company and the product are heading, it can't make good decisions. You can't solve this by adding a person to the group who does have this knowledge, but it would be better if the entire group knows this knowledge because the company generally communicates their company and product vision to the teams as much as possible so everybody is aware. The third best practice is that your group understands the technical vision. Very similar to the previous one. If you have the context, then you can make a better decision. Say your architect wants to go in this direction, or you have decided in the past that you need to speed up the build time. Now you're making a decision about the continuous integration pipeline that you have. This is effectively a constraint now. The whole team should be aware that the decision you make cannot slow down the build, because then it would break the decision that you have made before. If the entire team knows, the process of making a decision becomes a lot easier. My next tip is having a high psychological safety in your team. People should feel okay pointing out each other's mistakes. They should feel comfortable taking risks. I've talked about this a few times before, but they will only feel okay if they're not judged or attacked for speaking up about these things. The goal should be to respect each other's viewpoints, even if they're completely opposite. If somebody else has an opposite viewpoint, you should listen and try to understand by asking questions. That way you can make a better decision. The next helpful thing is to have a small group. Decisions will go faster this way, and you will have less groupthink. Research has shown that groups of less than 7 people are less prone to confirmation bias. The next tip is to have a more diverse group of people. The more different opinions and backgrounds people have, the more different opinions and point of views you can put on the table and you can inspect with your group. So you have more to choose from. Again, this is based on research that shows that you have a tendency of biased decision making if you have a bunch of people together that are very similar in their background and their beliefs and their opinions. Best practice number 7, listen to the devil's advocate. If you don't have a devil's advocate in the group, you can try and create one. Somebody of a completely opposite opinion of what you have. You could explicitly ask the group, what do you think are the downsides of my proposal? If you want to try being the devil's advocate, but you don't want it to become a negative thing in terms of communication style, then I would recommend trying to play the role of devil's advocate, but only allowing yourself to ask questions. You're not allowed to make any statements. Tip number 8, don't debate facts. If you notice you're disagreeing on something that should be a known fact, pause the discussion process. you're not getting any further. You need to find the data, the proof of what should be a fact, and the moment you have it, you can continue with the discussion again. A fact is different from an opinion. A fact should be easy to agree on if you just have the proof. Gathering the data and the proof for a fact isn't always viable because you're pausing the debate and it could take a lot of time. But if you can quickly look up something, it's definitely worth it. The next helpful thing is to gather opinions individually. That is, before you communicate in a group, before everybody shares their thoughts in a group, the opinions are already written down somewhere, collected, and then you start having the discussion in a group. This helps to counter biases. Everybody is forced to make up their own mind before they are influenced by others. The advantage is that loud or dominant people effectively take up less space. There's more room for the other opinions out there. The disadvantage of this is that it forces everybody to have an opinion, which can be hard on juniors or people who are not an expert on the matter. Helpful thing number 10 is to separate arguments from their weight. A common mistake in group decision making is that all arguments have the same weight, all arguments are equal. I like assigning weights to arguments because it can expose dominant voices, loud voices in the room who are trying to force a decision by assigning unreasonable weight to a specific argument, to their argument. This is also where your process can turn out to be either consent or expert first consent, because you can pick one argument from the expert, the considered expert on the topic, and make that argument weigh a lot heavier than the other arguments. And my last helpful thing is the disagree and commit principle. It's a well-known principle which states everybody is allowed to disagree while a decision is being made, but once it has been made, everybody must commit to it. Even if you didn't like or if your choice wasn't picked, you must live with it from now on as if it was your decision. I really like this principle because it's harmful to keep coming back to past decisions. Harmful for you and for the team. To summarize, learn about the different models. See if you can guess and can think of how you've been making decisions up until now. Then see how others in your team perceive your current process. Then discuss it in a retro when you're ready. From there, it's much easier to move towards a model that might be an improvement from where you are now. And that's it. I hope this was helpful. I hope you can use it. I'd like to hear from you. What does your decision process in your team look like? Please leave a comment and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.